Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to the Mobile Ecosystem Forum Personal Data and Identity Programs MEF briefing. My name is Ian McCallum. I'm Program Director for Personal Data and Identity for MEF. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. We're going to be talking about, my guests and I, about our recent white paper, Identity and Authentication Today, the second part of which was released last Wednesday, 14th of October. And my esteemed guests from both XConnect and Mvine, unfortunately, Trunomi send their apologies due to a last-minute emergency. Unfortunately, they're not able to join us today. But my guests and I will this afternoon attempt to outline the document that tries to define Identity and Authentication, or IAM, as the industry acronym, if you're from outside the industry, terms it. Try to understand the problem, in inverted commas, as we understand it. Examine and explain the rudiments of the sector the businesses need to understand to enable them to optimize their existing digital onboarding and transactional processes to best effect, as well as supplying some practical real-world steps and advice on how they might actually achieve this. Some of the topics from the both part one and part two, we look at the impact on business of the current identity paradigm, as it were. We look at issues around usability versus security, and achieving the optimal balance there to make sure that the onboarding process doesn't get in the way of your ability to transact online. We look at the wider question of security and data breaches, and for those not particularly au fait with the identity sector, we give some examples from around the globe about national identity schemes. I think we have from the USA, from Estonia, from India, and Nigeria, as well as the UK, which help to give anyone who doesn't have a good grounding in identity a really good feel for what's important in the sector. From part two, we try and help out with some key definitions within the identity market space. Many of my friends not involved in the digital world say that when they have tried to put a toe in the water, the acronyms abound within our space. So what we try and do is to identify and explain some of the key definitions for you, why they're important, etc. Talk about rise of OTP, or one-time password, and two-factor authentication. Hopefully quite a bit more about that as we move into the webinar itself. And we talk about how businesses should prepare themselves for what's happening today and obviously into the future. And I think lastly, we have some discussion around what should happen in the industry itself to make sure that we have the best, most dynamic future we can for all of us involved in the digital economy. If your job requires you to think about how your customers engage with your business, this white paper will help you achieve a better understanding of the sector, we hope. And today we will try and examine and dissect some of the key elements within it, help to demystify some of the complexity inherent in it. And we'll examine the role perhaps that government and regulators should play, especially in the post-COVID-19 environment, and examine the importance of the online user experience, what needs to change, and much, much more besides. So I'm joined on this quest today by two people who were instrumental in helping us put the white paper together over quite a long period of time. Lee Suka from XConnect, and Joseph Spear, Director of Communications at Mvine. And I shall be welcoming them very shortly. Let me get rid of our slide screen here. So I'm hoping that all of you can see us now. Gentlemen, if you'd like to introduce yourself, starting Lee.
Hi, I'm Lee. I'm the Market Development Director and Data Privacy Officer at XConnect. XConnect is a number of information service providers. We help telecoms companies assure their voice and messaging traffic that the traffic takes the right path, that both the sender and the recipient have trust in each other, and that the content is safe too. So that's me. That's what XConnect does.
Thanks, Lee. And Joseph, over to you.
Ian, thanks very much. I'm Joseph Spear. I'm Director of Communications at Mvine Limited. We're a UK-based deep tech company, and we specialise in digital platforms, which are next generation digital platforms that power the digital economy. Our business has been running since 2004, but we today still work and behave like a startup. We are fairly well known in the sector, in the telco sector, in the mobile sector as an aggregator, where our work includes organisations such as BT. For myself, I'm not a newbie at all to the telecom sector. I've been in the telecom sector since 2008, which I realise is probably a newbie to some of you on the call. But what I'm trying to say by that is, of course, that I'm speaking today as as an industry insider. So whether you are an operator, whether you are an aggregator or an integrator or a brand, I think what we've got here for you today will be of great interest. Thanks very much.
Great, thank you, Joseph. I'm having a bit of a problem getting my PowerPoint presentation back up, so I'll just run through very quickly the agenda that we've sort of cobbled together today. So we're going to talk about, I'll just run through this very quickly and then we'll dive in, gentlemen, if that's all right with you. So we're going to talk about, so the first item is, what is the identity/authentication problem? We're going to talk about what its commercial impact is, particularly around existing businesses and what they can do about that. We're going to talk about the COVID effect on the IAM market. What has happened over the last 6 to 7 months in terms of change, what needs to happen, because obviously it's had a huge effect on us all, both personally and in business and as a society. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. We're going to examine why businesses should care, and the answer is they absolutely should care, hence this webinar. But we'll try and answer some questions around what they should do today in terms of moving forward and optimizing their IAM processes. And then we'll try and have a little discussion, if we have any time left, around what the future might hold, what we would like to see it hold, particularly from I suppose a regulatory and government action perspective, but also in terms of what the industry needs to do to move forward, and perhaps MEF itself. So jumping right in, I'll go back to the first question. What's the problem with identity and authentication? We've got username and password, haven't we? Who would like to jump in first?
Sounds
Lee, you're itching to answer this one.
Well,
you go right ahead, sir.
So I think that it's worth just breaking down identity first into 3 bits, and I break that down into proofing. How do you demonstrate to someone you are who you are when the first time you meet them? And then authentication, presumably you've been given some credentials once you've proved who you are. How secure is that method of authentication? And then the third bit, presumably you want to share information with each other at some point. How does that work? So the problem is it's not easy enough, it's not secure enough, and it's not trustworthy enough for individuals to strike up new digital relationships with enterprises. And the consumer is not in control. And I think it would be very easy to ridicule the current situation. So why do we have to take our driving license and passports to the post office for them to photocopy it and sign them in order to then send to our solicitors for a housing transaction to proceed? Why are too many people, or too many enterprises relying on just the knowledge factor to your question, user ID and passwords? Are they good enough? And then we've got this whole very murky world of data bureaus and information sharing, which is completely opaque to the citizen. So that's how I frame the identity problem, and it just should be better. And I've not even touched on security breaches, organised crime, the surveillance economy. So that's why I'm itching to start, Joseph. This gets me excited, this stuff.
I'm delighted to hear it. Lee, you provided all attendees today with a really good scene setter on what IAM, Identity and Access Management, includes and what it looks like. Of course, there's identity and access management from the point of view of the consumer, and there's also identity access management from the point of view of the enterprise. So whether you represent a company which is B2B, a business to business, or whether you represent a company which is B2C, business to consumer, identity and access management is really quite vital for you. Not only to be able to identify your customers and your colleagues, but also to be able to have a trust relationship with those individuals, whether they represent a large company or a small company, or whether they are private individuals. If you are an operator and you have, say, subscriber contracts with individuals rather than block contracts with companies, this is a very, very important issue that, if you haven't already realized, is coming at you like a locomotive train. Why is that? Well, because it is the future of the internet. It is a new era in internet. It is a new era in online relationships and online business. That's why people like Lee is getting very excited about talking about this subject today. And who can blame him? In the course of today, I'm going to be using the F word. Yep. I'm also going to be using the C word. And these words are very, very important because, as Ian said earlier in the introduction, in our industry, it's rife with acronyms, isn't it? But I think the F word and the C word are two words that we can take away and remember today. The F word is federated, if you were wondering. And the C word, of course, is centralized. And these two words are very, very instrumental when we talk about digital identity, because whether you are trying to identify or assert your identity as a person, or whether it's a connected device, such as a sensor, or even a mobile device like this one, then there is some attributes about that device and about you which must be borne in mind. Now, we're going to come on to some of that in a little while. Just remember the F word, federated, and just remember the C word, centralized. And as we discuss together the issues, I'm sure you'll see why.
So when,
yeah,
sorry,
I have certainly breathed a huge sigh of relief. I once got hauled over the coals for something very similar. Well, actually, it wasn't obviously very similar. But thank you, Joseph. Thank you for that introduction. It was interesting while you were talking, just before we come back in, Lee. This position in which we find ourselves, where I come from the mobile sort of side of the industry, and I worked for the GSMA for a number of years on a project called Mobile Connect. And the phrase that I heard kicked around, ever since I joined the GSMA was in 2012 was username and password is broken. It's been broken for a long time, hasn't it? And something occurred to me that because the identity and authentication sector has become, I suppose, a victim of the complexity of online, first of all, the dealings and the industries that have grown up around it. And you mentioned some of that, Lee, in terms of the perhaps more opaque elements of the industry that the ordinary citizen consumer wouldn't necessarily come across, but has slowly become more aware of, the situation that is happening around personal data. And a question, I suppose, to you both: in online businesses' desire to harvest, I don't necessarily mean this in a negative way, to find out as much, naturally, to try and find out as much about their customers and the people who are interacting with them as possible, has that complexity made all of our job in the identity business much harder?
Well, okay, I think yes is the short answer. When Joseph mentioned the F word and the C word, I thought he was going to say fraud and crime. Because if we don't get authentication right, then guess what? Enterprises get defrauded, and individuals get their identity stolen. And when you talk about the aggregation of personal data so that enterprises can build up a bigger picture of you to more efficiently sell stuff to you, that's happening in a pretty uncontrolled way. And of course, when all that stuff gets breached as well, that adds to the problem of individuals' identities are out there, they're in the open. So these are complex ecosystems.
It is, isn't it? And I suppose from a citizen consumer perspective, I want it to be easy for, I want all of my personal data withheld if I possibly can, but I don't want to have to fill in, I want the onboarding and transactional element of what it is we're trying to do. I want that to be simple. And the truth is, perhaps at the moment, I can't have both. But obviously, that is the sort of nirvana that we're trying to, as an industry, create. Joseph, do you have a view on that issue?
I have. I've got several views on that, and I hear you loud and clearly. What you're saying. You're a man who speaks the truth to power. I can tell. And the important thing here that we must not run past is the brutal fact confronting us all, whether we're an operator, an aggregator, or a brand. And that is, people do not want to be identified. I'll say that again. They do not want to be identified. They want to be recognized. And that's a key difference and the key challenge to anybody involved in mobile technology, anybody involved in the services that sit on top of mobile telephony, whether it's data services or whether it's messaging services like RCS, rich communication services, or anything like that. They don't want to be identified. They want to be recognized. And just to unpack that just very briefly for you, identity systems necessarily will need to save and store something about you so that next time you sign in or next time you transact, they will know that it's the same person. But what if a system could be devised where you don't have to give away personally identifiable information about you to someone you don't know and someone you've never met. So that could be device-based, such as the attributes, the digital metadata attributes of your mobile device, or that could be something about you, tokenized, anonymized, somehow caveated so that people who don't know you and never met you and probably never will meet you, don't know your home address, don't know your date of birth, don't know your gender even. These attributes, these digital attributes about you are, well, have to necessarily resemble who you are in real life, in the real world. But what, why, if you don't ordinarily in the physical space tell people all about you, why do systems oblige you to do that in the digital realm? That's a really strong point to think about when creating, architecting, deploying, commissioning, and even decommissioning certain ID systems. So, is it possible then to have an identity system built on a trust framework that doesn't give away your personally identifiable information, but is it possible that you can be recognized upon sign in or upon sign up, sign in and transaction?
Okay, that's an interesting question. What's the answer? I think I know what the answer is. And I assume you're going to say yes, Joseph.
Well, if you're happy for me to continue just a couple more moments on that subject, well, the answer necessarily has to be yes. Technically, it's all possible. I mean, it really is just all possible now. Culturally, politically, lowercase p, politically, capital P, it's all possible. It is actually possible to have systems of identity which don't give away personally identifiable information, but which recognize you for who you are, based on a track record, based on past transactional history, perhaps, based on tokenized information about you.
Yeah, and I think, and sorry, I need to apologise for anyone watching. I think for extended periods of time, while other people are talking, you're unfortunately getting to look at my ugly mug. So my apologies for that. We're having a few technical difficulties there. But that's a really interesting. It's interesting that you sort of bring in the cultural and political elements of what we're talking about, because yes, from a framework and from a technical perspective, the ability to do that is more than possible. I would go actually a step further and say it's absolutely necessary if we are to develop the digital economy as we need to, and we'll talk about why, particularly around the pandemic in a little while. But we have to do that. Data breaches, are a continual issue. How many of us, have actually switched off now to sort of, massive data breaches where huge repositories of really personal data. It's happened to me. I'm sure it's probably happened to most of the people on the call at one point or another, relatively recently for me. And, this is a huge issue. Lee, you're probably champing at the bit with for this one.
Well, yeah, I just want to go back first to some of the things that Joseph said. So I kind of really liked that idea of being recognized. That is a new thought to me, but I certainly buy into it. And I clearly know that technology does exist to solve this problem. But I did an internet search a few days ago whilst I was trying to figure out in my head, why is this not coming to the surface fast enough? So I did a search on open banking. And on page 1, if I put myself in the shoes of a consumer, I got some really nice web pages telling me what open banking was and how it would benefit me. And then I foolishly did a search on identity wallet. And I got Amazon trying to sell me a nice leather wallet, and I got some real gobbledygook tech pages. So yes, the technology exists, but more work needs to be done such that, you know, enterprises can really understand it and digest it and roll it out. And, you know, we haven't gotten to governments yet, right?
No, let's hold that one back.
Yeah.
For a little while. But no, that's really interesting, and I think, like you, I think that the idea of promoting a concept of recognition, of being recognised, is a really powerful one. It's not, you know, I know you've talked about that before, Joseph, but it is a really powerful concept, isn't it? That it's a question of recognition. I think here we run up against issues around, you know, I do remember sort of in my days when I was much more involved in the sort of down and dirty about identity, and I probably understood much more of it at that point. But you know, there was a huge amount of issues. The idea seemed to be that we were going to try and make something that was fraud proof. And I think, you know, when we compare the digital world to the real world, I think we'd be a little bit naive, wouldn't we, to assume that, you know, people can't forge documents and take them in, you know, with a certain amount of confidence into a bank or a building society. We know that it happens, you know, of course it happens. Is it realistic for us to expect a fraud-free solution? Is that a realistic supposition? And if it's not, what should that level be? And I know that's an incredibly difficult question, but it's one that, you know, I suppose we're going to be asked from a societal perspective as an industry. What are your thoughts there?
Can I have a little go at that one, Lee?
Yeah, go for it.
All right, great. So, I mean, you're touching on a very, very moot point, and you know, the fraud aspect is a critical driver for enterprises embarking on identity access management programs in their IT estate, for telcos hardening their security posture through identity access management, whether that's colleague-based or whether that's consumer or customer-based. And there's obviously the proliferation of authenticators, which are digital in nature, for you to use off your mobile device to prove, yes, it's really me. Yes, it's me today, and yes, it was me yesterday. So, you know, some of the leading authenticators, Ian, you mentioned GSMA, fantastic authenticator from GSMA called Mobile Connect that you worked on. That sits alongside, and in my opinion, you know, is a standout winner for mobile operators, brands, and aggregators to really consider how best to use that technology based on all of the academic work, all of the research work, all the applied work that's gone on behind Mobile Connect. And I know that a number of telcos, mobile operators use that today. It's not the only one on the market, it's fair to say, but it is a very, very substantial tool, one that people should, in my opinion, should really consider. The fraud aspect is ever present. It's really an arms race. You can harden your security posture with a number of security rings. You are having to do that, confronting the very real need to expose some of your IT systems to the outside world, usually to members of your supply chain, and therefore out into your customer community as well. So the proliferation again of systems of connectivity, which are application programmable interfaces, APIs, they need to be gatewayed, they need to be securitized, and there's different methods and methodologies behind those things as well. In terms of the impact of fraud, well, all I can say really there is it depends on what trust game you're playing and what trust game you're prepared to play. The malicious people with malicious intent who commit fraudulent activity using mobile devices, they will always work to outsmart you, regardless of what technology barriers you place in their way. But because fraud is very lucrative, and I think to take the sting out of that is not just a technical exercise, it needs a societal change, which is another reason why for today, specifically for today, I want to really commend Mobile Ecosystem Forum, MEF, for its vision to publish 2 white papers on this subject. I think the CEO, Dario, has really got the bit between his teeth on this, and to his very great credit, he's running with that, and program leaders like you, Ian, you know, you've orchestrated and you've brought about a white paper like this, or these 2 white papers. And if you just have a quick look in your chat, you can see links to the both white papers there for you today. These white papers, I mean, in our industry, there's no shortage of white papers, are there? But these white papers, these 2 white papers, really distinguish themselves by their relevance, by their timeliness, and by the precision, talking about this very, very important subject, which, as I said in my introduction, is a future subject, but it's now also, it's right at you now. It's coming at you like a locomotive if you're not aware of it already.
Great, thank you, Joseph. Obviously, the fraud issue, you know, and it's perhaps a fool's errand to wish that you know, we'll have a fraud-proof future, either from a technical or from a regulatory perspective. But surely, huge repositories of individuals' personal data, you know, lying within companies whose core activity is not the protection and the protection of their customers' personal data. It's not their day-to-day business. So Lee, what needs to happen for us to sort of move away from that?
So I mean, I'll frame what some of Josie said a little bit different before I come on to that. And I think it comes down to enterprises having a process of evaluating risk at the heart of their business. And that's not only risk for them, but the risk of their customers. So thinking about what harm will come to the business, what harm will come to their customers, and the likelihood of that, you know, has to underpin, you know, methods of managing identity, whether it's proving who each other are or what methods of authentication you use. I think things like GDPR, you know, you play a role in opening enterprises' minds to that, you know, as do things like, you know, ISO 27001. Just to go back to the point about fraud-free world, or no, there's always going to be crime and fraud, right? But I think in terms of security, there's an awful lot of low-hanging fruit on the table to improve it. You've hinted at this a couple of times, you know, in your kind of interjections, and that is, you can't just rely on knowledge factors. Let's introduce some 2FA. So SMS one-time passwords, great example. The press have attacked them, but you know, every enterprise that's introduced SMS OTP has seen a massive reduction in identity theft and account takeover. It's only where perhaps those SMS one-time passwords have been used inappropriately, like to protect people's crypto wallets with hundreds of thousands of dollars worth on. Just for me, that's just a demonstration that the enterprise has not done a proper risk assessment.
Very much so.
So you asked me the question about, you know, all these companies collecting information about individuals, and of course those individuals aren't front and center in those enterprises' minds. Well, hopefully GDPR changes that. My worry is that supervisory authorities don't have enough teeth, because we've seen very few fines. Of course, British Airways got their fine reduced in the last couple of weeks from 187 million to 20 million, and that is the biggest fine handed out by the UK authorities. Yet we know there's lots of odd behaviour going on, and it wasn't so long ago that, you know, on the front page of the Sunday Times was talking about the Department of Education leaking data to bureaus so that they could onboard gambling companies, so gambling companies could onboard new customers easier. So I think there's a lot of shakeout in that world to come. You know, the ad tech world, you know, that is still aggregating information about us, because the whole cookie consent thing has just made it very difficult for us to say no. How many buttons do you want to press to say I don't want to be tracked? So,
yeah, it's an interesting use of the user experience, isn't it? Sorry, I'm getting a bit of lock here. I'm hoping you can hear me. It's an interesting use of the user experience to discourage you from asserting your rights around cookies. You know, it's like, you know, we're not born yesterday. It's obvious what people are doing, and yet, and that's obviously not in the spirit of GDPR, and yet it's the norm now, isn't it?
yeah, absolutely. You know, we're all spending more time at home in this kind of post-COVID world. We've all got our guards down a little bit because we're in our homes. We're doing more online. We're experiencing more fraud risks and security risks and identity theft risks. So it feels to me that in a post-COVID, post-GDPR world, we're actually at more risk as individuals than less.
So that's a lovely little segue into our next item. What has been the COVID effect on identity and authentication? You know, what we're talking about here. Now this, for any listeners who will be struggling to find mention of this in the white paper, although we do allude to the pandemic, we don't talk about it in a huge amount of detail. Perhaps we can address that a little bit here. What's been the effect? What have you guys seen that has interested you, made you feel positive, frightened the life out of you? What's been your view? Joseph, can we start with you?
Yeah, sure. Well, there's been a rush to digital, hasn't there? Quite frankly, and people who never realised that they needed a digital channel certainly do now, because of you know, well, there's nobody left in the corporate headquarters anymore, or very few. They're all working from home, and I think it was Microsoft just within the last 72 hours or so made an announcement that everyone can work from home permanently. I mean, you know, if you're looking for shift change, that's it, isn't it? And what's brought that about? Well, the global pandemic has changed everything, and so the shift to digital. If you weren't already embarking on a digital strategy, digital program within your organisation, you are now, and part of that is digital identity, digital authentication, digital verification of the people that you trade with, whether those people are upstream from you in terms of trade suppliers, or whether they're downstream from you in terms of partners, in terms of customers. You need to work with them on a digital basis. You don't want to see your revenue streams fall off the cliff. You don't want to stymie or stifle your supply chain. So you have to necessarily now find a digital route for it. And that necessitates a mind shift, which is why I talked about earlier the societal change and the cultural change, a mind shift toward digital that maybe wasn't there before.
Yeah, and this whole idea that Lee and I had a conversation, was it earlier today or yesterday, about what that means from what, what it means in terms of, working from home, because we don't have that hour and a quarter, hour and a half that we would normally spend traveling. I suppose there are different issues around it. Perhaps we don't get the time to switch off as much as we used to, but also the fact that what does that do to our sort of our work rate, our being aware of security issues, that perhaps might be easier to uphold in a sort of office situation when you've got a completely a diaspora of a workforce. Lee, perhaps you can explain our conversation a little bit better.
I think that the enterprise can't rely on the security infrastructure of the network, right? Because they can't control necessarily the endpoints. And when we're sitting at home working, I think we are in a different mode. I was thinking about the old-fashioned double glazing salesman, the pressure salesman that came to your house and made you feel like an alien in your own home.
Yeah.
And make you vulnerable, do things that you wouldn't ordinarily do if you went to them to go shopping, right? So I do think we are vulnerable to the risks we face more so, and of course we're doing more. But at the same time, I don't want to paint a bleak picture, because I think there is good progress. We see the rise of 2FA, SMS, OTP, we talked about that, but we also see the rise of secure authenticators on our phone. Some of those are using time-based code, some are using kind of biometrics. That's all great progress. And I used the example of recently, actually, my wife going to the post office with her passport and driving license. That is changing. We're seeing some great digital proofing technology. Gov.verify is much derided, but actually has a really nice user experience to get a secure authenticator on your phone, which has taken a picture of your passport or your driving license and checked that was valid. But those are obviously for very highly secure applications. But I think there is promise. Where I'm less confident is how proofing, authentication, and data sharing all ties together in one solution. I think there's a long way to go. We have to solve that. If we don't, not everybody is going to be able to digitize. We're going to leave mum and pup shops out of the market. We're going to make our economies vulnerable to monopolistic behavior, i.e. the guys that are big enough and got deep enough pockets to own identity for themselves. So, I'm talking about the US, Californian giants, technology giants. So I think this period, next 12 months, is crucial.
And let me sort of go a little bit off piste here. So what needs to happen from an industry perspective? So in terms of, it's my feeling that, governments and to a lesser extent regulators, I think regulators have a hugely important role to play. Certainly the last 20 years, that I've spent in mobile have been interacting with regulatory bodies both here and in Eastern Europe and Western Europe and Russian Federation, and it's been, I have to say, largely a really positive experience. But my feeling is that government has to take a firm lead here. And, we have had some, how should we say, there was a consultation with the DCMS a few months ago that was reported back on in the last sort of month or so, that was not particularly warmly received by industry. it felt as though they hadn't really taken it seriously, and we are an industry in need of direction. Not sorry, actually that's not true. We have direction. We know pretty much, I think, which way we should go, but for it to be enabled quickly and ubiquitously, and I think that's probably plays to the point that you make, Lee, about digital inclusion. We need to include everybody in this. It's everybody or nobody, because otherwise, you'll end up with inequalities, and we know where that leads. So, how do we get government to play ball with this? Have you guys got any views on how best we do this?
Sure, I'll chip in, Lee. Is that okay? So we're coming on to the wonderful world of public sector, of government, of central government in this conversation, which is a minefield all of its own, isn't it? But we've absolutely got to solve a critical question, which is well, I've used the words before in this conversation, which is the F word and the C word, right? So the F word being federated, and the C word being centralized. So it's a versus, right? It's not a game of two halves, but it's a competitive game. Is the future federated? Is the future centralized? Now, if you look at programs such as gov.uk Verify that Lee mentioned a few moments ago, it's based on a particular level of authentication, or level of assurance, actually, which is quite high, and which is the reason why you have to go through something like 52 screens or something like that to get signed up, which is a little bit odd. It gets a mixed reception, doesn't it? And if you are looking to onboard someone for a use, once per year, then okay, people will go through that if they want to be able to submit, for example, their tax in a digital way rather than submitting 52 pages or whatever it is of a tax return. So that's a main driver, and there's always a spike, funnily enough, toward 31st of January each year, where sign-ups to a program like gov.uk Verify, well, it just spikes. It's just a matter of fact. But I think it exemplifies a situation that is a part of the problematic, and that is the frequency of use. So if you're just using a mechanism, call it Verify mechanism, once per year to do your tax, you will go through the pain of signing up and signing on. But if you want to do something, if you want to transact on a quarterly basis, that's a bit different, isn't it? If you want to transact and do something on a monthly or on a weekly basis, that's different again. But what about if you want to do something daily? Now, the social media giants amongst us have absolutely nailed this in terms of how easy it is to get on board their platform. So they've probably learned a thing or two about being able to identify, authenticate, and authorize somebody coming onto their platform. Maybe there's some clues there for us. Maybe there's some indicators there that the mobile industry can think about as well, where you have to identify who this subscriber is, or who this target is, if it's an outbound comms piece, for example, with RCS. Are they authenticated to receive this information? And are we authorized to send it to them, and are they authorized to send something back to us and have a bilateral two-way conversation with us? Maybe even buy something from us. That presents a completely different angle, doesn't it, on the role and the importance of identity, because you seriously do not want to mess up your revenue stream, and that's a really critical aspect of what we're talking about here. So let me just throw a couple of numbers at you. DCMS, you mentioned that a couple of moments ago. DCMS in February 2020, they released some numbers which quantified the role or the contribution of the digital sector to the UK economy. £400 million per day was the number that they put on it, which is 149 billion in 2018, which was the figures at the year where the figures were most available. So what is that? That's just over 7.5% of the UK economy. So think about that for a moment. The digital sector accounts for 7.5% of the total UK economy. If we can get digital identity right, that will spur an adoption of digital ID, and that will see a growth in the adoption of digital ID will have a positive impact on the digital economy. And because we all participate in the UK digital economy, that will be good for business, whether you are an operator, whether you are an aggregator, or whether you are a brand.
Okay. Lee, do you agree with my statement about government? And if so, what do we do about it?
Yeah, look, I'm slightly worried that the governments of today have bigger problems on their hands and probably won't give this the attention it deserves. So I think it has to be the role of enterprises to get this right. And of course, if they don't get it right, they're leaving money on the table. I have two parents that have stopped online banking because they don't trust it. They've converted to checkbook and pen, not the blankety blank checkbook and pen, the real checkbook and pen, and they queue up at the bank. So
that's not the first time I've heard that.
The digital divide is happening now. It's not lessening, it's getting worse. And as companies have to rush to digitize, I would hate to, well, I know it's large, don't have the facts, but a large proportion of all economies are small businesses with less than 5 people. They do not have the knowledge and expertise to build secure e-commerce systems with privacy and identity at its heart. We have to make it easy for them, because if we don't, our economy is going to be dominated by large players and we'll just get monopolistic behaviour. So I'm not hopeful that governments can help here, because they're too focused on saving people's lives, quite frankly, right now, or not, depending on your opinions. So yeah, we need to address it.
It is interesting, and I get that. I think this is not it's not a government bashing session. That's not what it's about. As I think, as Joseph pointed out, gov.uk, or verified, by gov.uk, is actually a really robust sign-on system, but it's a bit of a sledgehammer to crack a walnut in much of the online transactional stuff that we do. The way that the onboarding works, people talked about the biometric system, is terrific. It's amazing the way that it works. But I think what is clear is government are not going to be able to solve this problem on their own. And I have heard rumblings that they think that possibly they can. So what I would say is, the industry is here. The industry of which we are a part have so much experience in this going back, 20, 25 years, that the solution lies here. And I think one thing that we can do, and I think one thing that MEF can certainly do, is to talk to government about, in partnership with other organisations. I sit on the board of a review panel for certain activities within OIX, and Joseph, obviously Mvine, are very involved with OIX as well. It's up to us really as industry spokespeople to speak to the government and find out what it is they can do. One constant request from the industry is that the government make available digital versions or copies, or the ability to be able to verify those of source documentation, like passports, like national insurance numbers, like birth certificates. This seems like basic stuff, doesn't it? And I think the industry could do so much more if in the UK, and obviously we're talking a bit about the UK today, apologies for our visitors from elsewhere, but you know, government sort of hold a lot of the documentation that is of use to approved in identity providers. So anyway, sorry, I'm rambling a little bit there, and we've gone a little bit off the agenda. My apologies for that. I'd like to, in the last sort of few minutes that we've got, it's not the final one, but I think a really important one, and for you know anyone from a brand, you know, or an online enterprise who's joined us today, what should businesses do today to bolster and optimize their identity and authentication processes? You know, I've onboarded a couple of new accounts recently, and getting presented with capture pictures over and over again, you know, seemed like a really clunky user experience. I wasn't particularly impressed. I wasn't able actually to do it very well, and maybe that's because I'm a bit of an old gimmer, but I don't think so. I'm quite tech savvy. What should the businesses, online businesses on this call, do today to really make a difference? Lee, can I start with you with that?
Yeah, happy to. So I think there are lots of takeaways from, you know, processes like ISO 27001, right? Security set of processes which all businesses should start to become familiar with to address, you know, the security problem. Notice I didn't say identity, focusing on security right now. I think there's lots of low-hanging fruit with authentication. So if you're just relying on knowledge factors, very simple, get some 2FA, use SMS. Your customer base is trained and ready. Think about your supply chains end to end, and then train your staff and train your customers. Those would be the four things that, you know, I would advise. And obviously Joseph will have a particular view. I guess what I would also say is employ companies like what Joseph works for to help you.
Thank you. That's really interesting, and that brings us back into, you know, what we're talking about, which is the two parts of the white paper. You know, and we say that very clearly, that you know, two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication processes are key. SMS has had I have to say, a bit of an unnecessarily bad press over the last couple of years, and you know, some of the work that my colleagues do in MEF around the SMS registry, working with UK finance and UK banks and big brands, you know, they trust, you know, if SMS is utilized properly as part of an overall solution, it's an extremely effective and ubiquitous solution. So please don't turn away from it on the basis of spurious BBC panorama reports. Same sort of question over to you, Joseph. What should businesses do today in terms of you know, and we talk about this in the document. So you know, please, in the chat, if you haven't got it already, you can download. I think the download links are in there. Please download it. Joseph, what should businesses do?
Businesses absolutely should act today, right now, before they go home. Well, they're all working from home anyway, but you know what I mean. Before you go home today, get your favorite web search tool out, whether it's a very famous one starting with G or another, and Google the 3 following terms. Ready? Zero trust, adaptive authentication, and dynamic trust. If you take a little time just to do web searches on those 3 terms, zero trust, adaptive authentication, and dynamic trust, you'll begin to see a picture emerge very rapidly about systems and technologies and methods and approaches, standards and architectures that will really help you make a difference. You should absolutely harden the security perimeter around your business today. You should think about how to let certain people in. In other words, are they expressly permissioned to interact with your systems? If they are expressly permissioned, to what level are they permissioned? You need to think about the possibility that trust can go down as well as up. What do I mean by that? They could transact with you faithfully for a period of months, and then they could do something which is completely out of the ordinary, which will affect your scoring, if you like, on their trust relationship with you. Look at the banks, look at how they do this. Look at the payment card processors, look at how they do this. Think about how payment card processors will contact you if they see a transaction appearing on your credit card which looks completely out of character, either because of the geography, the amount, or the place where you're going shopping. It might not be you. And they're very good at picking these things up. Take some of your cues for your business from these exemplars.
Okay, thank you, Joseph. I'm sorry to cut across you there, but I think we're on the verge of running out of time. Firstly, I'd like to thank you both for joining me today to talk about some of the stuff that we've uncovered in the white papers. I think the examples you just gave there of areas of potential research for people on the call could probably feed a whole series of webinars. MEF are doing a huge amount of work in the coming months around, particularly around security, that this issue will address. If you are new to MEF, please feel free to wander around our website. There's a huge amount of resources there that are available to the public, not necessarily just to MEF members, but if you have any queries relating to this, or you'd like any contact for the gentleman who joined me today, please feel free to reach out to me directly. My details are on the website. I think I've covered it all. It only really remains for me, gentlemen, to thank you very much for your time and attention, not just today, but also in terms of getting the white paper together. It was a Herculean task made much easier by your involvement. So thank you for that. And thank you to everyone who's joined us today from wherever you are in the world. Please make sure you make a note of our upcoming webinars. They're all on the website. I should have put a link in for that, and I haven't, unfortunately. But please, if you're involved in this sector and you'd like to speak, MEF is the place to be. Please reach out to us directly, and thank you very much for your time and attention today. Take care.